I'm going to read an extract from the opening of my new book, In Another World, Man Morrison and Belfast. It sets the tone for the book, and it's like the platform that we enter the train and off we go. It's Belfast. The radio had a cloth face and was quite an imposing looking object, sitting in an alcove of the living room, alone, slightly iconic, above the television that was equally sturdy looking in its timber housing. The furniture of the 1950s remained set in place. The sofa, the presses, the dinner table, the side table, the baize tablecloth with its tassels, the little door under the stairs, the step down to the foreboding pantry, the workaday cottage-like air of that kitchen, and the yard with its high walls, mangle, washing line, larder, coal sheds, outdoor lavatory, and the door to the entry or alleyway. The back of the house was the working half, the engine room. The front was for entertainment, and in our case for business, where my grandmother taught elocution, piano and singing. The rest of the house was all about privacy, rest, dreamland. It was an unexceptional house in its own little terrace, a version of grander houses with grander expectations, a different kind of lifestyle that had been lived in the earlier decades of the last century. Now, post-war, post-marriages, in this house of women, grandmother, mother and sister, I was the only man, and a mere slip of a boy at that, notwithstanding the occasional visit of my uncle, stationed in foreign climes, and of my grandmother's party-going friends, aging stylists of a bygone time. I remember it all well, or maybe I remember well what I think it all was. One way or another, in the regular world of those years, as people got on with their lives as best they could, the experience of the Blitz still very much inscribed on the Belfast landscape of the time, and returned to a normal world of work and play. I was utterly unaware of all of this. As a self-absorbed young boy, I was, however, fascinated by stories overheard, the hints of a previous world before my world, the way things once were. My young boy radar fixed on the songs that came out of the front room, the laughter, the recitations, the piano playing, the singing, but also the music that came over the box in the corner, and by decade's end, the sound of music my mother listened to, from Workers' Playtime to Billy Cotton, two-way family favourites, the Broadway hits, swing and trad jazz. And when her brother was home on leave from the RAF, the sound of American leading ladies, such as the queen-like Ella Fitzgerald, but also the unmissable, alluring otherness of quite a different voice, rich, exciting and unforgettable, Sarah Vaughan, a familiar name, a name you might hear in the street, and yet so totally unexpected. It was probably from listening to my aunt's stories of minding Judy Garland during the Fading Star's last great hurrah in the London Palladium, as well as her anecdotes about Frank Sinatra and the swooning English girls who fell head over heels in love with the great crooner of the 1950s, that sparked my interest. Our house always had music somewhere, from piano practice to that big awkward radio set that sat brooding in the corner of the living room. Edmundo Ross gave way to the light programme, to Nat King Cole and Peggy Lee. And by the end of the 1950s and into the early years of the 60s, the radio yielded to the transistor, and more emphatically to the clumpy record player that took over the front room. My mother enjoyed jazz. She listened to it on the radio, and when her brother finally left the RAF and settled briefly back in Belfast, he brought records with him. The television, which formed part of our communication centre, sat there under the radio, and between them both the sounds of British jazz started to filter through. Acker Bilk's Stranger on the Shore was a signature tune. Kenny Baker with his bouncing brill cream hairline, George Chisholm and the cool, perplexing beauty of Cleo Lane's voice, with Johnny Dankworth, a seemingly shy presence in the shadowy background of what whatever show it was we were watching. Léinn sounded so different when compared to other acts that were beginning to get airtime. At that moment, with singers such as Helen Shapiro and Dusty Springfield, there was something so utterly contained in her voice that even when she went off on one of those scat-life riffs, part madrigal, pure invention, I wasn't sure what to make of it. The calm seriousness, the conviction, the controlled flights of invention. For a young lad, it was all breathtakingly uncertain what was actually going on. There was a jazz combo I used to love listening to, called The Peddlers, and on one show on which they were guests, when they performed a brilliant version of Misty, Cleo Léinn appeared after their set. The mood she created on our black and white TV was haunting and mysterious. When the chance arose many years later, during the Belfast Festival at Queen's University, I went along to hear Cleo Léinn and Johnny Dankworth talk about their music and play extracts of it. I think it was in the old music room, one of those smaller lecture theatres, and there were about 20 people present. That's what it seems like in memory, at least. I recall my discomfort at being one of the few and not really knowing where to look. But they talked and joked, and we had a session, unplugged before unplugged happened. I'll never forget that. This is what real artists do, I thought. The size of the audience isn't important. Looking out the back window, waiting for Match of the Day or the Day of the Triffids to come blinking on the TV set in the gathering dusk of a Saturday night, a young lad born in the early 1950s hears for the first time Sarah Vaughan sing her great love song Lover Man, and the 1960s break cover in North Belfast.